LoreWarrior Campaign, The Battle for Luthien, Scenario 7, Dogfight, Death in the Sky. Excerpt from a letter written by Captain Adam Fox, commander of the 2nd Hellhounds Aerospace Fighter Company, to his sister Evelyn, following the Battle of Luthien. I know what the news faxes say about Luthien, but the truth was worse than any reporter could ever describe. The Combine Aero jocks got first crack at the Jaguars and the Nova Cats, but there were just so many clanners, the Dracs couldn't stop them all. To make matters worse, the Nova Cats held back some of their fighters during the in-run, and then launched them later to give their mechs air cover. The clan mechs tangled with the Drac line units for a while, but then they managed to punch a hole through them, and that's when we got involved. 1st Battalion pulled ground attack duty, along with 2 flights from the Dragoons. The rest of us got tagged for air intercept. We rode high cover on the attack flights until we spotted a squadron of clanners on an intercept vector for our buddies. We swung around and made one of the fast passes through the Jaguar formations, and then all hell broke loose. I got into a rolling scissors with a Visigoth and almost flew into the ground trying to break away from him. I'm not sure how I did it, but when I finally got my Reaver under control, there he was, sitting fat, dumb and happy right in the middle of my sights. I pressed my firing grips and the Visi just exploded. I was still congratulating myself when a pair of Batus jumped me. The whole thing was like that. Everywhere you turned, enemy fighters were swarming. I ran out of ammunition after about 15 minutes and had to retire, but even in that short time, I racked up 2 kills and 5 assists. God, I was scared, but I didn't have time to notice. I never felt more alive. Situation: Imperial City Air Defense Zone, Luthien, 11:30 hours, 05 January 3052. Following the collapse of the Combine line, the Nova Cats and the battered Smoke Jaguars began a quick march toward Imperial City, supported by clan aerospace elements. As the invaders approached Basin Lake and the Waseda Hills, a new phase of the battle began: the fight for air supremacy between the clans and the mercenary units. Elements of Wolf Dragoons and the Hellhounds aerospace divisions launched a series of attacks against the clan fighters, engaging in a furious free-for-all. The battle swung quickly in favour of the mercenaries, who held tenaciously onto any advantage they could grab, and in the end, the clan fighters were driven from the skies, leaving the Innisphere defenders in total control of the area over Luthien. Scenario 8, Hound's Teeth, Trading Punches. Excerpt from the personal journal of Captain Mike Fitzhugh, 112th Company, 1st Battlement Battalion, Hellhounds. The Nova Cats fought like no other opponent we'd ever faced before. In most mech battles, there's some dodging, maneuvering, a little long-range sniping that precedes the close combat. Sorta lets you feel out your enemy and figure out his strengths and weaknesses. The Cats, they didn't waste any time with such preliminary dancing around. They crested the hill, stopped for a moment to dress their lines, and they charged. We hit them with everything long range that we had: missiles, lasers, PPCs, even Gauss rifles. I cut loose with a volley of 380mm missiles from my catapult's Arrow 4 system and lit up a vulture. When the flames died and the smoke cleared, he was still there. I thought that pilot had to be the luckiest man on Luthien to weather a full flight of arrows like they were nothing more than shotgun flechettes. Then I saw the vulture had no arms anymore, and then the thing's head split and then an escape couch rocketed in the air about 5 seconds before PPC fire smashed the mech's engine shielding. The resulting explosion gutted the mech. I guess that guy really was the luckiest man on Luthien. Situation: Waseda Hills, Luthien, 12:30 hours, 05 January 3052. As the Kurita house unit struggled to contain the advance of the Smoke Jaguars, the Nova Cats pushed deep into the Waseda Hills in a bid to reach Imperial City before their clan comrades. Confidently, the Cats raced across the Basin Lake Valley and through the first line of ridges ringing the Kadoguchi Valley. Relying on Comstar intel, they expected to meet militia regiments there. Instead, they ran into 3 frontline regiments from the Hellhounds and Wolf Dragoons. The mercenaries stopped the Nova Cats' initial rush cold, and then initiated a series of stop-and-go engagements designed to delay the invaders long enough for the mercenaries' aerospace units to strafe and bomb the Nova Cat formations. The tactic failed to completely halt the Cats' advance, however, as the 119th Striker Cluster engaged the mercenaries, The 32nd Assault Cluster made a flanking march around the mercenary position and reached the Kadoguchi Valley. Scenario 9. Backstab. Rabbit Punch. Excerpt from the personal journal of Tai Roof Horner, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Genyosha. After that first rush, things became quite confused. The Smoke Jaguars took the brunt of our attack and kind of folded up on themselves. From the look of things, I thought the clanners were about to start running, and I hadn't even fired a shot yet. Then the Nova Cats got into the picture and punched straight through the First Sword's lines. I knew the mercs were back in the Waseda Hills waiting for any clanners that slipped by us, but so many cats broke through that a few regiments of hired guns weren't going to stop them. I half expected Taisa Nelson to pull us out the line and send us off to bolster the mercs. My company got pulled out the line alright, but not to help the mercenaries. They sent us around into the clanners' rear area to strike their reserves. When we reached the staging area, we hooked up with a company of Otomo. The plan directed us to move along a riverbed, evading the Omnimex sensors, and once in position, we'd swarm up out of the gully, shoot up the clan reserves, and fade away before they knew what hit them. Of course, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Situation: Katsura River Valley, Luthien, 13:45 hours, 05 January 3052. As the fighting in the Waseda Hills began, the engagement on the edges of the Tairakana Plains would wind down. The pounding taken by the Smoke Jaguars and Nova Cat's subsequent breakthrough left some Kurita companies with little to do. In hopes of increasing the pressure on the battered Smoke Jaguars, Theodore Kurita would order 2 2nd Genyosha companies and 1 Otomo company to launch a lightning raid into the clan's rear area. He instructed them to attack the Jaguar reserves, cause as much damage and confusion as possible, and then pull out. 2 Kurita mechs were destroyed and almost all took serious damage in the operation. The raiders, in turn, left 8 clan machines destroyed or so badly damaged that the invaders abandoned them during their withdrawal from the planet. Scenario 10. The Sheep Fight. Sideshow. Excerpt from Tracks in the Sands, The Battle of Luthien by James O'Sullivan, Cavalier Press, and Robinson, 3054. The Battle of Luthien didn't consist solely of the clan's attempt to take Imperial City, as some writers would have you believe. Although the Imperial City and Kadoguchi Valley Theatre did receive the most publicity, the clans also landed forces elsewhere on Luthien. One of these so-called sideshows took place outside Amori, a seaport in the Seiyo Sea. In this battle, a cluster of freebirth mech warriors and elementals dropped into the Shidan Basin with orders to capture the Arisaka munitions complex at Haratsun. Intelligence provided by Comstar led the invaders to expect a poorly equipped militia defending the complex. However, that militia, the 1st Amori militia, was led by Tai Jeremy Velk, a decorated veteran of the 4th Succession War and the War of 3039. Under his training, the 1st Amori achieved a level of readiness that equaled that of many frontline units. Velk also used his DCMS connections to obtain refurbished mechs and equipment for his troops, and thus when Star Captain Edna led the 22nd Freebirth Cluster into the Shidan Basin, they were not prepared for the battle they were about to face. Situation: Shidan Basin, Amori Military District, Luthien, 1350 hours, 05 January 3052. Provided with inaccurate intelligence, the clan invasion planners assigned the capture of the Arisaka munitions complex to a Freebirth cluster. Meanwhile, Tai Velk marshalled the 1st Amori militia in the marshy rice paddies of the Shidan Basin. The defenders drew their lines along one of the few solid roads crossing the muddy terrain, while the river monitor Minkuchi took a concealed position in the reeds lining the Shidan River. As the clan warriors crossed the slippery paddies, Velk sprung the trap. The Amori militia put up a stiff resistance and then feigned a panicked retreat across the 2 Shidan River bridges. As the invaders followed them across the spans, the militiamen detonated charges that destroyed both bridges. Backed by ground armour and the Minkuchi, the militia pinned the clans against the rain-swollen river. Caught in a completely untenable position, Star Captain Edna did the only thing she could to avoid destruction of her command, and surrendered. So another 4 scenarios covered there, with a key element running through the whole thing, and that is Comstar. Comstar clearly manipulated the events here by giving the clans massively out-of-date information. They didn't let them know that the Kellhounds and the Wolf's Dragoons had arrived to defend Luthien, and thus the clanners of both sides wandered into the battle expecting a much weaker force than what they actually found. Scenario 7, as we see the Kellhounds and Wolf's Dragoons aerospace forces engage the Nova Cats over the Imperial City air defense zone, resulting in several heavy losses for the clanners to the point where they had to basically give up air superiority in that sector. An important thing, given that the main push by the Smoke Jaguars was to conquer the capital city and thus capture the basically capture the royal family of the Kuritans and try and force the entire Draconis Combine to surrender or else. Not a good start in that regard. Then in Waseda Hills, where the Nova Cats had punched through the Draconis Combine forces, expecting to be able to basically run rampant and maybe gain some honour and the such. In that regard, they ran smack bang into the Kellhounds who were waiting for them in that sector, where they just completely smashed through and caused a lot of heavy damage to the Nova Cats who had broken through that area, especially once the aerospace forces had come in, because again, the Nova Cats had no air superiority at this point, so they were on a massive back foot. Then, in the Rabbit Punch scenario, a classic raid, the kind of thing that the clans just don't do, and thus don't expect at this point in the invasion. So, yeah, the Innisphere forces were more than capable of being able to catch them off guard and cause several nasty hits there, resulting in them losing several battle mechs, or omnimechs in this case, and having to abandon some of them. Regardless of the state they're in, you can imagine some pretty good tech was left behind and captured there by the Kuritans. And finally, in probably the most shocking one is the sheep fight, scenario 10, with the Freebirth forces. We know that they surrender at the end of the battle, and we have to assume that they gave up quite a few second line clan mechs, but regardless, those are still mechs that are equipped with clan technology. And we're looking at things like Shadowhawk 2Cs, Jenna 2Cs, Locusts 2Cs, Peregrines, Vixens, Hellhounds. I mean, these are all things that could easily be pulled apart. They can take a look at it, and it allows the Kuritans to get that little lead that they need post-invasion to start developing some new tech and being able to develop things like Omnimechs of their own, as Kurita was the house that developed the first Innisphere Omnimechs. As far as the battles go, as far as size, rather than me just taking up a huge chunk of time reading out all the little information there for the pilots and the such, I just leave it there. The largest battle out of these four was definitely the Waseda Hills, between the forces of the Kellhounds taking on the Nova Cat Striker Cluster and some of the, I believe it's some of the Smoke Jaguars Elementals. But it's, let's see, 3 lances of Kellhounds battle mechs and 2 lances of aerospace taking on 2 stars of clan mechs and basically 2 stars of elementals in a pretty big fight, let's put it that way. The aerospace combat in the first scenario I mentioned, scenario 7, is I believe 5 lances of Innisphere Aerospace taking on 2 stars of clan aerospace forces. The raid one's actually quite interesting, because I would say if you were to play this as a straight up fight, it would be a massive loss. But obviously the special rules of the scenario dictate this, because the clans as the defenders in this one have 2 stars of mechs and a star of elementals, and they're being attacked by a lance of battle mechs in the fire lance, and a secondary lance of mediums, and then some armoured infantry. So it's quite an interesting little scenario there on a pretty small sort of map setup. And the sheep fight one's actually quite big. It's 2 stars of clan battle mechs and 2 stars of elementals going up against, I believe it's 2 lances of mechs and and a platoon of, well, basically it says a platoon. It's a lance of tanks and some infantry and a boat. It actually that one actually does incorporate, but if it had an aerospace element, it would actually be all parts of BattleTech, all represented essentially in the ground combat space of things, because you have the river section and obviously infantry and tanks and all the rest of it. There, yeah, it's quite a big fight. So yeah, these are all the kind of the side shows, as it says. These are all the little fights that were sort of kicking off as the clans were sort of trying to desperately drive toward Luthien itself, and they were chipping away, but in response, the clans were losing far more than they could actually sustain as the fight was going on. Though they are better fighters on average with better equipment, every single loss is felt far more than anything that the defenders take. You know, the defenders can absorb losses, and they're also well prepared. They're entrenched. They have traps set up. You know, we hear about one minefield, but that could be one of, you know, dozens, hundreds of minefields that were set up prior to, and every single time that the clans are attacking, they're potentially running into these types of traps being set up, being ambushed behind their lines. Even when they're basically taking a break or getting set up for the next attack, there's always the risk that they're going to be jumped by Kuritan units that have, you know, basically stayed hidden and waiting for these kind of opportunities to strike. So basically the clans are constantly on edge, always having to look over their shoulder, and at the same time they're driving toward an objective that they know they don't actually have the resources to sustain a long battle. We're already at this point in the timeline, we're getting into the afternoon of the first full day of combat. Basically the make or break point is coming up when they get to the Kadoguchi Valley, but I'll save that for the next one. Thank you all, as always, for hanging on and listening. As the next one, we're going to have an interesting little, again, another little side battle that takes place that happens at the exact same time as one of the other scenarios, and then we're getting into the Kadoguchi Valley itself, basically the major conflict of Luthien, where it all hangs in the balance. Basically, the winner of that will determine, you know, the overall victor of the conflict. You already know what it is, but yeah, it's a pretty significant little battle there. So I'll leave you with that. As always, thanks for joining, and I will catch you on the next one. And yeah, we're not too far off finishing Luthien, so I hope so far people have enjoyed it. So judging by the comments people have, so yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more in the future. So have a good one. Bye. Bye.